Sometimes the biggest mistake isn't breaking the law. It's assuming you already know who deserves your respect. The deafening roar of helicopter blades rolled across the hospital parking lot, swallowing every voice, every siren, every excuse. Nurses froze beside the emergency entrance. Police officers instinctively shielded their eyes from the swirling dust. Patients waiting for rides looked toward the dark sky as a matte gray military helicopter descended with impossible precision onto an empty section of pavement that had never been intended as a landing zone. Flashing lights reflected across the aircraft's steel body as its wheels touched the ground, and for one endless moment the entire world seemed to stop breathing. No one spoke. No one moved. Every pair of eyes remained fixed on the helicopter as its rotors continued to spin, sending leaves and loose medical papers dancing through the cool Washington, D.C. night. A police radio crackled with frantic voices. "Command, be advised. Unidentified Pentagon aircraft has landed at Memorial Regional Hospital." Another voice answered almost immediately. "Stand by. Do not interfere." Confusion spread through the crowd. Hospital security exchanged nervous glances. Reporters across the street instinctively raised their cameras. Even the officers standing closest to the yellow patrol vehicles looked uncertain, as though they suddenly realized this ordinary parking lot had become the center of something far beyond local law enforcement. Near the flashing patrol lights stood Officer Ryan Walker, his jaw tight, one hand resting against the handcuffs secured around the wrists of a woman wearing faded navy blue scrubs beneath a light gray jacket. She looked exhausted, her shoulders heavy after what seemed like an endless shift, tiny strands of dark curly hair escaping from beneath her surgical cap. A disposable hospital badge still hung from her pocket beside a stethoscope that had clearly seen countless hours of use. Her name was Danielle Brooks. She didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She simply watched the helicopter descend with the same quiet composure she had carried since the moment the encounter began. The bright floodlights from the aircraft reflected in her tired eyes, yet there was no panic there. Only patience. 8 minutes earlier, nearly everyone in that parking lot had believed they understood exactly who she was. A weary black nurse leaving another impossibly long shift. A woman carrying an insulated lunch bag, a worn backpack, and the invisible weight of caring for strangers long after most people had gone home to sleep. Officer Walker believed something else entirely. So did several people watching from a distance. They saw fatigue and mistook it for suspicion. They saw silence and mistook it for guilt. They saw an ordinary woman and convinced themselves her story had already been written before she had spoken a single sentence. But stories built on assumptions rarely survive the truth. As the helicopter doors slowly opened and several uniformed officials prepared to step onto the pavement, a quiet murmur spread across the crowd like a ripple across still water. Danielle finally lifted her eyes toward the aircraft, exhaled softly, and whispered just loudly enough for the nearest officer to hear, "They're right on time." No one around her understood what those 5 words truly meant. Not yet. And in just a few moments, every assumption made in that parking lot would begin to fall apart. 8 minutes earlier, Memorial Regional Hospital had been winding down from one of the busiest evenings anyone on the emergency floor could remember. Ambulance doors had opened one after another without pause. Monitors had echoed through crowded hallways, and every available nurse had moved from room to room with quiet determination that came only from years of experience. Danielle Brooks had not looked at a clock in hours. She measured time by empty intravenous bags, discharged patients, and the number of worried families she had managed to reassure with a calm smile despite feeling completely drained herself. Her shift had officially ended almost 40 minutes earlier, yet she had stayed because another nurse had been delayed by a family emergency. No supervisor had asked her to remain. She simply could not bring herself to leave while people still needed help. That was the kind of person Danielle had always been. She believed compassion was not something you turned on when your badge was clipped to your uniform. It was something you carried long after the shift ended. As she finally stepped through the employee entrance into the cool night air, she paused for a moment and closed her eyes. The crisp breeze felt different after spending nearly 20 hours beneath fluorescent lights. Her shoulders ached from lifting equipment. Her feet reminded her of every mile she had walked through endless hospital corridors, and her coffee had gone cold long before midnight. Even so, There was a quiet sense of peace knowing every patient under her care had been left in capable hands. She adjusted the worn backpack resting on one shoulder and reached into her jacket pocket for her car keys. Inside her lunch bag was an untouched sandwich she had never found time to eat. Her phone displayed dozens of missed notifications, but one message remained pinned at the top of the screen. It contained only 4 words. "Thank you for coming." No signature. No explanation. Danielle read it once, slipped the phone back into her pocket, and continued walking across the nearly empty parking lot. Above her, low clouds drifted across the Washington sky, reflecting the glow of city lights. The hospital behind her remained alive with activity, yet out here everything felt strangely quiet. A maintenance worker waved as he pushed a supply cart toward another building. Danielle smiled politely before continuing toward her aging silver sedan parked near the far edge of the employee lot. She never noticed the patrol vehicle slowly entering from the opposite direction. Officer Ryan Walker had been finishing what he expected would be a routine patrol around nearby medical facilities. The evening had been filled with minor traffic complaints and wellness checks, nothing unusual for a Wednesday night. As his headlights swept across the parking area, one figure caught his attention. A woman in hospital scrubs carrying several bags walked steadily toward a vehicle, appearing exhausted after a long day. Most people would have seen exactly that. Ryan noticed something else. He watched her pause beside the car, glance briefly toward the street, and check her phone before unlocking the driver's door. Small, ordinary actions that somehow felt suspicious to him after years of relying more on instinct than patience. He slowed the patrol car, studying her through the windshield. Danielle never looked up. She was already thinking about going home, taking off her shoes, and finally getting a full night's sleep, completely unaware that someone had begun writing a story about her before learning the first truth about who she really was. Officer Ryan Walker pulled his patrol vehicle to a smooth stop several yards behind Danielle's sedan, the flashing lights painting long ribbons of blue and red across the damp pavement. Danielle turned slowly, surprise replacing the quiet relief she had been feeling only seconds before. She glanced around the parking lot, instinctively wondering if someone nearby needed help. Hospitals were unpredictable places. Emergencies did not stop at the emergency room doors. For a brief moment, she even considered that the officer might be searching for a missing patient or asking employees whether they had witnessed an accident. Instead, Ryan stepped out of his cruiser with measured confidence and walked directly toward her. "Good evening, ma'am," he said in a firm but controlled voice. "May I ask you a few questions?" Danielle offered a tired but polite smile. "Of course, officer. Is something wrong?" Ryan studied her carefully instead of answering. His eyes moved from the backpack resting against her shoulder to the insulated lunch bag in her hand and finally to the hospital identification badge clipped near her pocket. "Have you been inside the hospital all night?" he asked. "Yes," Danielle replied honestly. "I just finished my shift." Ryan nodded without changing expression. "That was a long shift." Danielle let out a quiet breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "Longer than I expected." She hoped that would be the end of the conversation. Her feet ached, her eyes burned with exhaustion, and home was only 20 minutes away. Instead, another question came. "Can I see some identification?" Danielle reached calmly toward her jacket pocket. Every movement was slow and deliberate, shaped by years of working around frightened patients who deserved reassurance instead of sudden gestures. She handed him her driver's license together with her hospital identification badge. Ryan examined both cards for several seconds. Everything appeared valid. Her address matched the license. Her employee identification looked authentic. Nothing seemed obviously unusual. Yet something continued to bother him, though he could not have explained exactly what it was. Danielle noticed his hesitation. "Is there a problem with my identification?" she asked gently. Ryan looked back toward her vehicle. "Is that your car?" "Yes." "How long have you owned it?" "Almost 6 years." "Do you have registration and insurance?" Danielle nodded. "They are in the glove compartment." She waited for permission before opening the driver's door, but Ryan immediately raised one hand. "Please stay where you are." Danielle stopped without complaint. Nearby, 2 nurses leaving the hospital slowed their conversation as they noticed the exchange. A hospital security officer glanced toward the parking lot from the entrance before returning inside. No one appeared alarmed. It looked like an ordinary police encounter, the kind people assumed would end within a minute or two. Danielle remained respectful because she believed respect often encouraged understanding. She answered every question clearly, never raising her voice or showing frustration despite the growing delay. Deep inside, however, another concern quietly settled into her thoughts. Every passing minute mattered tonight. Somewhere beyond the city lights, people were waiting according to a schedule that could not easily be changed. She looked briefly at the time displayed on her phone before locking the screen again. Ryan noticed the glance immediately. "Are you expecting someone?" he asked. Danielle met his eyes with calm honesty. "Yes," she answered softly. "Someone important is expecting me." Ryan interpreted those words very differently than she intended, and without realizing it, both of them had just taken another step toward a misunderstanding that neither one could yet see clearly. Ryan Walker lowered Danielle's identification cards only slightly, his expression growing more guarded instead of more reassured. The answers she had given were consistent, her documents appeared legitimate, and nothing she had said openly contradicted itself. Yet the confidence in her voice unsettled him. It was not arrogance. It was something quieter, the calm certainty of someone who believed she had nothing to hide. Instead of seeing that as a reason to end the conversation, Ryan convinced himself it was a reason to look deeper. "You said someone important is expecting you," he said. "Who exactly?" Danielle hesitated for only a second before answering. "I am not able to discuss that." Ryan frowned. "Not able or not willing?" "Not able," she repeated politely. "I understand how that sounds, officer, but I really do need to leave soon." The words only strengthened his suspicion. In his experience, ordinary people rarely answered simple questions that way. He took one step closer and glanced toward her vehicle again. "I would like to take a look inside your car." Danielle remained composed. "Is there a specific reason?" "I am asking the questions." She nodded slowly. "I understand. I simply want to know if there is a particular concern I can help clear up." Around them, the parking lot remained unusually still. A physician finishing his shift walked toward his truck before slowing to watch from a respectful distance. Two paramedics loading equipment into an ambulance exchanged uncertain looks. Nobody interrupted. Police encounters were not uncommon outside busy hospitals, and most people assumed the situation would resolve itself within moments. Danielle took a slow breath. She had spent years calming frightened patients by controlling her own emotions first, and that same discipline guided her now. "Officer Walker," she said gently after noticing the name on his badge, "I respect the work that you do. I have cooperated with every request. If there is a misunderstanding, I would like to resolve it as quickly as possible." Ryan folded his arms. "Then you will not mind waiting a little longer." Danielle glanced briefly toward the hospital entrance before returning her attention to him. "Waiting may create a serious problem for other people." Ryan interpreted the statement as another attempt to pressure him. "For who?" Danielle looked down for a moment before meeting his eyes again. "I cannot answer that." The silence that followed seemed heavier than the cool night air. Ryan reached for his radio and quietly requested another unit to respond to the employee parking lot. Danielle heard every word but showed no visible reaction. She simply stood where she had been asked to stand, her lunch bag still hanging from one hand, her backpack resting against her shoulder, her face marked more by exhaustion than fear. One of the nurses watching from nearby whispered, "That is Danielle. She has been inside all day helping everyone." Another employee nodded in agreement, but neither of them stepped forward. They assumed the officer would eventually realize there had been a mistake. Ryan returned his attention to Danielle. "For everyone's safety, I need you to remain here while we sort this out." Danielle answered with the same calm voice she had used since the conversation began. "I will remain respectful, officer. I only hope time is not something we both end up regretting losing." Ryan dismissed the remark as little more than frustration from a tired hospital employee. He had no way of knowing that somewhere beyond the city skyline, a carefully coordinated timeline was already moving forward without either of them, and every passing minute was bringing an extraordinary arrival closer to the hospital parking lot. The second patrol vehicle rolled quietly into the parking lot, its headlights sweeping across the rows of employee cars before stopping beside Ryan Walker's cruiser. Officer Melissa Grant stepped out, taking in the scene with a quick glance. Danielle remained exactly where she had been standing, her posture relaxed despite the growing attention around her. Ryan walked toward Melissa and spoke in a lowered voice. occasionally glancing back toward Danielle. Melissa listened carefully, then looked at the nurse for herself. Nothing about Danielle appeared threatening. Her hospital scrubs were wrinkled from an exhausting shift. Her sneakers showed the wear of countless hours on polished hospital floors, and the insulated lunch bag still rested quietly at her side. If anything, she looked like someone who needed sleep more than another conversation. Ryan returned a moment later. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you again. Is there anything inside your vehicle that I should know about before we continue?" Danielle answered without hesitation. "Only medical textbooks, an extra set of scrubs, and supplies I use during volunteer clinics on weekends." Ryan studied her face, searching for signs of uncertainty that never appeared. Instead, Danielle reached slowly into her jacket pocket. "May I check the time?" she asked. Ryan nodded cautiously. She unlocked her phone, looked at the screen for barely 2 seconds, then quietly slipped it back into her pocket. Another notification had appeared, but she never opened it. Melissa noticed the brief vibration. "Everything all right?" she asked. Danielle offered a small, tired smile. "I hope so." Ryan frowned. "You keep saying things that sound mysterious." Danielle shook her head gently. "I'm not trying to be mysterious. I am trying to be respectful of responsibilities that do not belong only to me." Before Ryan could respond, another vibration echoed from inside Danielle's backpack. Ryan immediately looked toward the bag. "What is making that sound?" Danielle answered honestly. "Probably my secure pager." Ryan's expression hardened. "Secure pager?" Danielle nodded. "Yes." "Issued by who?" For the first time since the conversation had begun, Danielle paused longer than usual. She looked toward the hospital entrance, then back at Ryan. "I am sorry, officer. I cannot answer that question." Ryan exchanged another glance with Melissa. The answer only deepened his concern. "Please place the backpack on the ground." Danielle complied immediately, carefully setting it beside her feet without making any sudden movement. The pager vibrated once more before falling silent again. Melissa looked at Ryan. "Should we call this in?" Ryan gave a short nod and reached for his radio. Within moments, dispatch acknowledged the request and began checking the information already collected from Danielle's identification. While they waited, the parking lot grew noticeably busier. Employees finishing late shifts slowed as they passed, whispering to one another after recognizing Danielle. One respiratory therapist quietly remarked, "She stayed nearly 20 hours today. She barely had time to eat." Another nurse added, "She never leaves until every patient is stable." Danielle heard every word but kept her attention on the officers. Her calm never changed. She neither protested nor complained. She simply stood beneath the glow of the parking lot lights, breathing steadily as another cool breeze drifted across the pavement. Then Ryan's police radio crackled again, but this time the dispatcher sounded noticeably different. "Unit 12, stand by. We are receiving multiple priority notifications connected to your location. Do not clear the scene. Additional instructions are being transmitted now." Ryan looked down at the radio with growing confusion. Danielle quietly closed her eyes for a brief moment, as though she had been expecting those exact words all along. Ryan stared at the radio clipped to his shoulder as another burst of static filled the cool night air. Dispatch spoke again, slower this time, every word carefully chosen. "Unit 12, remain at your current location. Repeat, remain at your current location. You will be contacted by a federal coordination officer. Do not release the scene until further instruction." Ryan exchanged a puzzled look with Melissa. Neither of them had ever heard language quite like that during what had begun as a routine encounter. Melissa quietly asked, "Federal coordination? Over a hospital parking lot?" Ryan did not answer immediately. His eyes drifted back toward Danielle, who remained standing exactly where she had been asked to wait. She did not appear surprised. If anything, she looked relieved that something had finally begun moving according to schedule. Her shoulders were still heavy with exhaustion, but the quiet concern she had carried throughout the conversation seemed to soften ever so slightly. Ryan noticed it immediately. "You knew that. Call was coming," he said. Danielle looked at him with the same calm expression that had never left her face. "I knew someone would eventually realize I had not arrived." "Who?" Ryan asked again. Danielle lowered her eyes for a brief moment before answering. "People who are depending on me." The response frustrated Ryan even more because it answered nothing while somehow sounding completely sincere. Another notification vibrated inside Danielle's backpack, followed this time by a faint electronic tone unlike the ringtone of an ordinary phone. Melissa glanced toward the bag. That does not sound like a regular pager. Danielle nodded politely. It is not. Ryan folded his arms. You still cannot tell us who issued it. No, officer. Even now, Danielle met his eyes. Especially now. Around them, more hospital employees had gathered near the entrance, careful to remain at a respectful distance. Quiet conversations spread through the small crowd. Several recognized Danielle immediately, speaking about the extra hours she had worked, the patients she had comforted, and the countless times she had volunteered without asking for recognition. One elderly patient waiting for a family member pointed toward Danielle and quietly told the person beside him, "She stayed with my wife until she stopped being afraid. That woman has done nothing except help people." Ryan heard the words, but kept his attention fixed on Danielle. Experience had taught him to trust procedures over opinions, yet something about the entire situation no longer fit together. Dispatch interrupted his thoughts once again. Unit 12, additional information received. Estimated arrival at your location is less than 2 minutes. Maintain current position. Ryan looked upward instinctively, although the sky above the hospital remained dark and quiet. Melissa checked her watch. Whatever this is, it is moving fast. Danielle slowly turned her face toward the clouds, listening instead of looking. For several long seconds, there was nothing except distant traffic and the familiar sounds of ambulances arriving through the emergency entrance. Then, almost too faint to notice at first, a low rhythmic vibration rolled across the night. Several people lifted their heads at the same time. The sound grew stronger with every passing second, deep and unmistakable, echoing across the rooftops of the hospital complex. Hospital staff stopped walking. Conversations faded into silence. Even the paramedics loading equipment into an ambulance paused in the middle of their work. Ryan narrowed his eyes toward the southern skyline as a single navigation light appeared beyond the buildings, growing brighter with astonishing speed. Danielle quietly exhaled, almost as though an enormous weight had finally been lifted from her shoulders. Without taking her eyes from the approaching aircraft, she spoke in a voice barely louder than a whisper. They made it right on time. The helicopter descended with remarkable precision, its powerful rotors sending cool air sweeping across the hospital parking lot as loose papers lifted briefly from the pavement before settling again. Every conversation stopped. Every flashing patrol light seemed less important beneath the steady navigation lights of the military aircraft. Ryan Walker stood frozen, unable to understand why a Pentagon helicopter would arrive at a civilian hospital in the middle of the night. Melissa Grant instinctively stepped back, her eyes fixed on the aircraft as its landing gear touched the ground with practiced accuracy. The side door opened before the rotors had completely slowed. 2 uniformed military security personnel stepped onto the pavement first, scanning the area with calm professionalism rather than urgency. Behind them came a silver-haired lieutenant general in dress uniform whose presence alone immediately changed the atmosphere. His posture reflected decades of leadership, and every movement carried quiet authority. Without acknowledging the crowd, he walked directly toward Danielle Brooks. The surrounding officers automatically cleared a path without being asked. Hospital employees watched in complete silence, exchanging confused looks as the general stopped only a few feet from Danielle. His expression softened the moment he recognized her. "Dr. Brooks," he said respectfully, "we apologize for the delay." Danielle smiled for the first time that evening, though the exhaustion on her face remained impossible to hide. "There is no need to apologize, General. I know everyone is doing their best." Ryan blinked in disbelief. "Dr. Brooks." The words echoed through his mind. He had spent the last several minutes assuming she was simply a tired nurse finishing another shift. The general turned toward Ryan and Melissa with measured composure. "Which officer is responsible for delaying Dr. Brooks?" Ryan stepped forward before anyone else could answer. "That would be me, sir." The general nodded once without anger or hostility. "Officer, do you understand who Dr. Danielle Brooks is?" Ryan hesitated. "No, sir." The general looked back at Danielle before speaking carefully, making certain every word was unmistakably clear. Dr. Brooks serves as the lead medical specialist assigned to a Joint Department of Defense Emergency Biomedical Readiness Program. She continues working regular hospital shifts because her civilian experience directly strengthens our national preparedness mission. Tonight, she was scheduled to brief senior defense officials regarding a critical medical readiness exercise already underway. A quiet murmur spread through the hospital staff gathered near the entrance. Several nurses looked at Danielle with astonishment. They had admired her dedication for years, yet none of them had imagined the quiet woman beside them carried responsibilities reaching far beyond the hospital walls. The general continued calmly. The helicopter was dispatched because when Dr. Brooks failed to arrive at the secure meeting point on schedule, multiple agencies initiated continuity procedures to determine whether an emergency had occurred. Ryan felt every assumption he had made collapse beneath the weight of facts he had never considered. Danielle had never exaggerated her importance. She had never threatened anyone with influence. She had simply asked not to lose valuable time because other people were depending on her. The secure pager, the unanswered messages, the unexplained schedule. Every detail suddenly fit together. Danielle looked toward Ryan with the same kindness she had shown patients all day. There was no satisfaction in her expression, no desire to embarrass him before the growing crowd. There was only quiet disappointment that such a misunderstanding had been allowed to grow so large. Under the bright hospital lights, surrounded by police officers, medical workers, and military leaders, the truth finally stood where assumptions had been only moments before. For several long seconds, no one spoke. The only sound was the steady rhythm of the helicopter blades slowing behind them and the distant hum of ambulances arriving at the emergency entrance. Officer Ryan Walker lowered his eyes, replaying every question he had asked, every assumption he had made, and every opportunity he had missed to simply listen. The confidence that had guided him only minutes earlier had quietly dissolved into reflection. Lieutenant General Howard Ellis accepted a secure folder from one of the military officers before turning back toward Danielle. Dr. Brooks, the briefing has been delayed until you arrive. Every participating team is standing by. Danielle gave a grateful nod. Thank you, General. I appreciate everyone's patience. Before taking another step, she looked toward Ryan. Officer, may I have my identification and personal belongings back? Ryan immediately handed her driver's license, hospital badge, and backpack with both hands. Yes, Dr. Brooks. I sincerely apologize for delaying you. His voice was noticeably quieter than before. Danielle accepted her belongings without hesitation. Thank you. There was no bitterness in her response. No public lecture. No attempt to embarrass him in front of the growing crowd. Her calmness somehow carried more weight than anger ever could have. Melissa Grant watched the exchange carefully. She had witnessed countless difficult encounters during her career, but very few ended with this kind of dignity. One of the senior military officers stepped toward Lieutenant General Ellis and quietly confirmed that transportation was ready. The general nodded before addressing Ryan once more. Officer Walker, situations like this remind all of us that responsibility begins with observation, but it must always be completed with understanding. Ryan answered respectfully. Yes, sir. The word stayed with him. Nearby, hospital employees slowly began returning to their routines, although many continued glancing toward Danielle with newfound admiration. The respiratory therapist who had spoken earlier smiled quietly. She never wanted recognition, he said softly. She just wanted to help people. An elderly patient sitting near the entrance gently applauded once. A few others followed, not because of Danielle's government responsibilities, but because they finally understood the character they had already witnessed every day inside the hospital. Danielle noticed the applause and appeared almost embarrassed by the attention. Please, she said with a warm smile. Everyone should get back to taking care of the patients. They are the reason we are all here. Several nurses laughed gently before heading back through the sliding emergency doors. Even after everything that had happened, Danielle's first concern remained the people inside the building. Lieutenant General Ellis smiled with quiet respect. That is exactly why we asked you to serve. As Danielle prepared to leave, another police vehicle arrived. This time it carried a supervising lieutenant from Ryan's department, who had responded after receiving the unusual dispatch notifications. After a brief conversation with the general and Melissa, the supervisor turned toward Ryan with a thoughtful expression. Officer Walker, I will need a complete report before the end of your shift. We will carefully review every part of tonight's encounter to make sure we learn from it. Ryan nodded without protest. Understood, Lieutenant. He knew this evening would not be remembered as an ordinary call. It would become a lesson that could shape every decision he made from that day forward. As Danielle walked beside the general toward the waiting helicopter, the cool night air carried away the last traces of confusion, leaving behind something far more valuable than embarrassment. It left behind the opportunity for accountability, humility, and a better understanding of the responsibility that comes with every uniform, whether it belongs to a police officer, a nurse, or someone quietly serving a mission far greater than anyone could see. The helicopter lifted smoothly into the Washington night, its lights slowly disappearing beyond the clouds until only silence remained over the hospital parking lot. Life gradually returned to its familiar rhythm. Ambulances continued arriving. Nurses hurried through automatic doors. Families waited anxiously for news about loved ones. Yet for everyone who had witnessed the extraordinary events of that evening, something had quietly changed. Officer Ryan Walker remained standing beside his patrol vehicle for several moments after the helicopter disappeared from sight. The parking lot looked exactly as it had an hour earlier, but it no longer felt the same. He thought about Danielle Brooks walking out of the hospital after nearly 20 hours of caring for complete strangers without asking for recognition. He thought about how calmly she had answered every question, how respectfully she had treated everyone around her, and how she had never once used her extraordinary responsibilities to demand special treatment. The only thing she had ever asked for was time, because other people were depending on her. Ryan realized that the greatest lesson of the night had not come from a lieutenant general or from a Pentagon helicopter. It had come from a woman who understood that true leadership never needed to announce itself. The following morning, Memorial Regional Hospital welcomed Danielle back for another shift. There were no cameras waiting outside. No formal ceremony had been arranged. Most patients had no idea what had happened the night before, and that was exactly how Danielle preferred it. She greeted coworkers with the same warm smile, checked on recovering patients, and quietly thanked the overnight staff before beginning another demanding day. Several nurses looked at her with new admiration, but Danielle gently redirected every compliment toward the entire medical team. "No one saves lives alone," she said. "We only succeed because we trust one another." Those words spread through the hospital faster than any rumor ever could. Days later, Ryan attended a professional development meeting where supervisors discussed communication, observation, and the responsibility that comes with making decisions about other people's lives. He listened more carefully than he ever had before. When asked whether anyone wished to share a recent experience, Ryan slowly stood. Without mentioning confidential details, he spoke honestly about the danger of allowing assumptions to grow faster than facts. The room remained silent until he finished. Several officers quietly nodded because they understood that humility was not a weakness. It was one of the strongest tools an officer could carry. Danielle never spoke publicly about that evening. Her focus remained exactly where it had always been, on healing people, supporting families, and serving wherever she was needed most. Whether she wore hospital scrubs or attended secure government briefings made little difference to the way she treated others. Her character never changed with her title. Perhaps that was why so few people recognized the extraordinary responsibilities she carried. They were too busy noticing the uniform instead of the person wearing it. Long after the parking lot returned to normal and the helicopter became nothing more than a distant memory, one simple truth remained. Respect should never be earned only after someone's achievements are revealed. Dignity should never depend on a job title, a government credential, or the arrival of powerful people. Every person deserves to be treated with fairness before their story is fully known. Because the greatest mistake is not failing to recognize someone's importance. The greatest mistake is believing their importance determines whether they deserve respect. That night, one weary nurse quietly reminded everyone watching that character speaks long before authority ever does, and the strongest form of justice begins the moment we choose to see another human being before we judge them.